So what we're going to do here is we are going to make our own brushes, make custom brushes. Okay, so this is really easy to do. Now I'm starting off with some texture images that I've created, just really simple and easy. This is, they're all kind of, these distressed textures, but it doesn't really matter. This one actually is just like a kind of wood grain texture here, but it doesn't really matter what your texture is. To create a brush is very easy. First you create a selection. Now I can just take a marquee, rectangle marquee selection, and then so where the tool is, it's under edit, the edit menu at the top, and it will be define brush preset. Now I'm clicking on this now to show you that it's here, but it's grayed out. Right now what happens is, and depending on the version of Photoshop you're in, when you're clicked on a adjustment layer, sometimes it doesn't show up there, actually. But this, just to show you, I was clicked on a mask, but I'm actually on this live part of the adjustment layer. You can see here it's highlighted. When I go to edit, define brush preset is actually there, but when I'm on the mask portion of this layer, it's not available. It's grayed out, right? Now in older versions of Photoshop, actually you can't even be clicked on an adjustment layer. You have to be clicked on an art layer. So that is any layer with artwork on it. It could be a blank layer too, but just not an adjustment layer. Any non-adjustment layer, basically, you would click on, like, let's say the background here, and then that becomes available. Edit, define brush preset. Now once I click on that, what that does is it's going to launch it like an option to save the brush, and you can name it whatever you want. Sample, it'll automatically just give it like a default name, sampled brush. You can hit OK, and you can see actually it previews 1889. That's like the pixel density of this brush. So it's a pretty big brush because it's starting with a pretty big image, but I'm gonna hit OK. And now, I'm going to use this brush on this PK type here. So I'm actually going to add a mask to this. You can see I have this layer of this monogram here, and I'm going to use this little mask icon down here, add a mask. And now automatically when I add a mask, it goes to my brush tool, and my brush will automatically give me the last brush that I just made. Okay, so if you're making brushes, whatever brush you just created will be the last, it will be the most current brush that comes up when you click the brush tool, and B is the brush tool. Now, as we know on masks, if you want to hide anything on that object, you paint black on the mask, and revealing it, you paint white, or it starts off as a white mask, so nothing is hidden from this PK. But if I switch my colors, or right now I have white as the foreground color, black as the background, X will switch them, and then if I just again, I have my opacity at 100. I can make this brush bigger and smaller using the bracket keys, but I'm just going to click one time so you can see what the brush is like. And again, I'm on the mask. Okay, make sure you're on the mask, and then you can see it adds that texture right here, and super easy. Okay, so now I am going to just make another brush of another one of these textures, just again so you can see how easy it is. Any selection that I have, and again, all I'm doing is using the marquee, and just picking up that area of the image. Now again, in the newer versions of Photoshop, it doesn't matter if you're on an adjustment layer or not, as long as you're not on the mask of that adjustment layer. So again, if I'm on this mask and I go to edit, it's grayed out, not available. But if I go to the live part of the adjustment layer, or even if I just click on background, edit, define brush preset is available, and it will grab that sample. And again, you can see this is 2601 pixels, and now I have a new brush. So again, I didn't even click anything. All I did was, I was still on this mask layer here, and it automatically pops up this brush that I just created. And I'm going to use the bracket left key to make it a little smaller, and then I'm going to, again, I have black as my foreground color. I'm going to click once just so you can see, a different texture that I just created for this brush. Okay, super simple. I'm gonna hit Command Z, and I'm gonna do it with one more, just with the same way basically. Now again, I'm on a hidden layer, so you know, in older versions of Photoshop, if I do this, it won't have edit define brush preset available, but because this is a newer version, it doesn't matter. So I'm going to define that brush, and then you can see again, sample brush. This one's even bigger, almost 3200 pixels, and I'm going to hit OK, and I'm going to go back to my little working file here, and again, the brush loaded default just brings me to the most recent brush, and I'm going to click again on the mask, again painting with black, and you could see that brush. Okay, so it's super simple, really easy to make these brushes. Okay, Command Z, and I'm going to show you one last thing. Now I've been using this rectangle marquee to create my brushes, but if I want to create something that is a little more seamless, I can use the lasso tool, and what I can do is I can actually work on what I want the brush to look like beforehand. I mean, what I could really do, like to be simple and quick, is if I have something like this and I want like kind of like a seamless edge to my brush, I could just go and create, a selection like this where it is, kind of picking up areas that aren't necessarily going to give me anything that feels like an edge. Okay, so I have this random selection now instead of just a marquee. And again, just don't be on a mask when you're making the brush, and edit, define brush preset, and now you can see this brush, it's not, it doesn't have the edge on it like those last brushes did. Okay, so I'm gonna hit OK, go back to my PK type here, and then again I'll make this smaller just so you can see that now this doesn't have an edge to it, so it's like more asymmetrical. And if you're trying to do edging, textures on edging, that kind of thing, then this works. Or even just have something smaller that you can move around and use in sections where it doesn't give you a hard edge. So everywhere I click, it's not giving me like that hard edge. Whereas if I use one of those other brushes, let's say the first one I created, and I make it smaller and kind of like go in one portion, you could see it gives me like the line where the edge of that selection was when I first made that brush, right? So it feels like it's kind of like a hard line. So a way to get around that is just make a more of a funky selection that's imperfect. Now the last thing I'll show you is that instead of doing that, what you can do is you can create a new layer and actually create what you want your brush to look like. So let's say I use I can use another grunge brush and just paint white on some of these areas, and that will make it seamless. Or if I can even just use like a soft brush like this, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint a little kind of soft brush just to take the seam feeling away, like that edge feeling away from this brush. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the blending mode on this to dissolve. So instead of watch, when I put it back to normal, you can see it's a soft edge, and that's fine too. You can keep it so it's not all the same level. It kind of grays out or fades out a little bit if that's what you want, and you can even just do that and make sure other parts of the image have that. Again, I'm just painting on another layer with white just to hide some of those seams or edges of what would be the brush. But if I click dissolve here, that just kind of like gives it this gritty texture rather than it fading out. And then if I take the marquee selection and select around this whole thing, even though it is a square, because all of this is light colored, it's just going to pick up these darker areas. Okay, so when I go to edit, define brush preset, now you can see my brush again here in this little thumbnail, it doesn't have a seam on it, doesn't have an edge to it. Okay, so it's more like you can get away with using this in smaller parts of your image, or it doesn't have to cover the whole part of the image. It doesn't have a seam. So again, going here, like I said, it will always default to the latest brush you just created. I'm just going to make it a little smaller and just click an area so you can see how these kind of brushes, when you're not having like an edge to it or a seam to it, you can kind of just use it on areas of your image. Okay, and you can, any texture you have, you don't even have to convert it to black and white first or grayscale first. You can do any image and just make any selection and it will automatically kind of grayscale for the brush's purpose. But when you do it in black and white or grayscale, you have a better idea of what it's really going to look like. Okay, and I'll just show you what that is. Okay, so again, right now I take all the effects off this wood texture instead of black and white, but if I go to edit, define brush preset, you can see now just instead of having as much contrast, it does pick up the texture, but it's a lot more grayscale and not as much contrast and not as defined. But I'll even just show you what that looks like. So I'm going to deselect that, add a new layer, and and even the brush itself, this is the brush, even though it looks like a square, it's because the brush is so kind of heavy, so I'm going to paint with black just so you can see. I'll make the brush a little smaller, but again, now one hit of the brush just adds and I'll get rid of these other layers so you can see, but one hit of the brush just adds this overall texture that's very similar to the color depth of the color version. Okay, so that is that, and you can move this around like a layer, and if I make a selection of it, again, it'll pick up parts of the selection so you can see that this is actually been brushed. And that's it.